A player like him should be completely unknown to the casual fan. However, since August, we have not stopped hearing about him. Yuki Kawamura has played just over an hour of basketball in his NBA career, yet he is one of the most talked about players in the entire league. His 5'8" frame, coupled with his great performance at the last Olympic Games in Paris, caught everyone's attention. And now, in Memphis, he is trying to find his role in order to enjoy a long career on US soil. But at the same time, we are all aware of a tremendously important factor. Players like him no longer have a place in the league. And proof of that is that Yuki is the shortest player in the entire NBA. Nowadays, a guard like him becomes a defensive liability that all teams try to exploit. All the coaches in the league design systems to find the weaknesses of the teams. And if Yuki had an increased role, I have no doubt that he would be the man they would attack when facing Memphis. Something that makes him unplayable? Well, not really, because there are aspects of basketball that cannot be quantified. You can't count mentality, you can't count self-confidence. Thanks to factors like these, Yuki could become a very special player capable of playing a very special role. So make yourselves comfortable, because today we're going to talk about the scary truth about Yuki that nobody is noticing. Before he reached the NBA, and long before he became a world-famous player, Yuki was already a star. At just 18 years of age, at a time when players rarely make their debut in the association, he had already become an important member of one of the B-League teams. In fact, Yuki became the youngest player in B-League history when he made his debut. The San En Neo Phoenix were the first to offer him a chance to compete in the top tier of Japanese basketball. But it was the Yokohama B Corsairs who realized that he could become one of the best players in the entire league. The Corsairs were not an incredibly powerful team. In fact, they have been a team unable to establish a winning culture since the early 2010s. The greatest triumph during this era was the signing of Hasheem Thabeet, former number 2 overall pick in the 2009 NBA draft, for one season in 2017. But when Yuki joined the team in 2020, they became an average team at least. During his last 2 seasons in Yokohama, Yuki averaged just over 20 points and 8 assists per game. Exceptional numbers in a much slower basketball that allowed him to become the B-League MVP in 2023, as well as being selected to the All-B-League first team. A resume like that should be enough for an NBA franchise to take notice of him, right? Well, that wasn't the case. Yuki declared for the 2023 draft and wasn't selected in any of the 60 picks. But the reason was simple: the lack of recognition of the Japanese league in American territory. The B-League is a league in full expansion whose driving force is Japanese fans who are increasingly interested in basketball, something that is allowing the competition to grow gradually over time. But that was not enough for Yuki. It was not enough for some NBA management to trust him. With a lot to prove, Kawamura had the opportunity he needed: the biggest showcase in world basketball. No, I'm not talking about the NBA Finals. I'm talking about an event that happens much less frequently, because for the second time in the last 50 years, Japan qualified for the Olympic Games in Paris. Yuki, one of the best players in the whole league, who had been crowned MVP just a year earlier, was of course selected by Tom Hovas. And in France, he showed everyone what he was capable of. He had a game of 11 points and 7 assists against Germany, and a game of 21 points and 10 assists against Brazil. But his performance of 29 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists against the hosts made him the headline grabber. All the sports media outlets reported on this 5'8" guard who was able to dominate against one of the favorites. However, the reality is that Japan lost all 3 games, and consequently, they were eliminated from the fight for medals in the group stage. But Yuki emerged victorious from the situation, because in those games against powerful teams full of NBA talent, he excelled, and that allowed him to increase his stock until he got a spot to play in the preseason with the Memphis Grizzlies. It wasn't his numbers that caught the attention, but it was his moves. his passes, his self-confidence, and swagger on the hardwood. His highlights celebrated by a euphoric Ja Morant. Although he only played 15 minutes per preseason game, fans fell in love with his game, and that convinced Zach Kleiman to offer him one of the two-way spots available to NBA franchises. Mission accomplished, right? Yuki had not only managed to get on the league's radar, but he had also found a franchise that trusted him. Well, what he still had ahead of him might be even more complicated, because getting real minutes in the case of a player under a two-way contract is a practically impossible mission. We are already in the final stages of the regular season. The teams that are going to enter the playoffs are practically decided, and as they say, at this point, the die is cast. And these 3 quarters of the regular season, Yuki has managed to play 63 minutes in the NBA. Yes, I'm talking about the whole season. His averages of 1.2 points and 0.7 assists per game in his 20 appearances don't seem to leave much room for optimism. However, people don't seem to realize that these weeks are going to be the most important of his career. Memphis is comfortably in 3rd place in the Western Conference after a season in which they have exceeded expectations. Not only is a playoff spot practically assured at this stage, but they will probably be able to secure home court advantage in the hypothetical first round. And when this time of the season arrives, unfortunately for Adam Silver, teams start to abuse load management. Ja Morant is at a point in his career where he needs rest. And despite the fact that Scottie Pippen Jr. is one of the best backup guards in the league, and Luke Kennard is clearly ahead of Yuki in the rotation, Kawamura will be able to get minutes in those last games of the regular season. We have already seen this in Memphis when Kenneth Lofton Jr. scored 42 points in the last game of the 2022-23 season after barely getting any opportunities. And if one thing is clear, it is that Yuki has to make the most of it. Life as a 5'8" guard is not easy in the NBA. We are in the era of point forwards, in which the players capable of running the offense are getting bigger and bigger. Think of Giannis, Bron, Luka, Prime Ben Simmons, Cade, LaMelo, Flag. Players like them were the ones who forced huge undersized talents like Isaiah Thomas to lose his place in the league. And after all, this is part of evolution, right? Well, there is also reason for hope. Let's look back at the case of one of the players who was the X factor in an NBA Finals. 15 years ago, JJ Barea, coming off the bench and later starting, was one of the reasons why the Mavs were able to beat the Big Three Heat in 2011. With his 17 points in Game 5 and his 15 points in the deciding Game 6, Nowitzki got the help he needed to win the only ring in the history of the franchise. But no one expects Yuki to become a starter either, and it is undeniable that his value outside of the sport, being one of the best players from a big market country with a growing love of basketball, has facilitated his presence on an NBA roster. But in a specific role, he could be an incredibly valuable player. He already has the talent. He demonstrates this every time he steps on the court with enormous self-confidence. He has also demonstrated this in the 16 games he has played in the G League, averaging 12 points and a league third best 9 assists per night. But as a backup point guard, he could be an immediate impact player. Think of TJ McConnell, Tyus Jones in his Memphis years, or even Fred VanVleet. Think, as I said, of JJ Barea. Those kinds of undersized guards managed to be low-minutes, high-impact players during the best years of their careers. What makes us think that a player like Yuki is incapable of doing it? What makes us think that his presence on the court could be a disadvantage for his team? Well, for the moment, his inefficiency. Something that, if the player progresses adequately and gains experience, could be a completely mitigatable factor. It is likely that this will only happen at the moment if the Grizzlies suffer injuries. It is more than likely that Taylor Jenkins still won't trust him when the playoffs arrive. But if we know anything, it is that in April, May, and June, coaches look for any option to gain an advantage. Any player who can offer quality minutes, and looking to the future, Yuki is one of the players with the most potential to fulfill that role. for his unpredictability, for his swagger, for a unique style of play that captures the essence of the 2000s with passes that are no longer seen in the league. Kawamura is a player who has much more inside him than what we have seen of him. He has not been tested yet. He has not yet been given enough confidence to prove it, but he has all the elements that an X factor needs to be decisive. He checks all the boxes to become a player capable of changing the course of the game in a matter of seconds. And although giving him a chance is a risk for any coach in the analytical era in which we are immersed, the reward for doing so can be much greater.